I'll show you like that's exactly yeah. This fire is actually I had trouble with articles the intro. There's just the intro. Like it was kind of there's a sort of right now it's fine. I mean, I'm done with my surgery case. That was here's my I'm on to Saturdays right now.
Oh, that looks great. Okay. All right. Sorry that it took so long to set up. So as fast as I could go. But for those of you who didn't realize this last week while you're eating turkey, what we have here is a streaming website of the lectures now at my website, johngerdowa.com/stream. And not that I think anyone is streaming this right now, except what I think last week was just my girlfriend streamed it. But the cool thing about these are also they record, so it then automatically posts to YouTube, to my YouTube channel feed. So this is only the second time I've used it, and I appreciate you allowing me to test out the technology, because next semester I think I'll really use it a lot more. This semester I started with the videos, and those worked well, but that took a lot of work. So I'm going to do the streaming thing, and that automatically posts to YouTube, which is a lot easier, which I think is pretty cool. And I'm very fascinated by the technology because we didn't have this stuff when I was in college. Now you have so much opportunity to do so many crazy things. As I pointed out, I've streamed Skype with Michael Moore. I Skyped with 2 other guest lecturers before. I'm hoping in the future I can actually have class with the Google Hangouts for the students that can't attend. I had a student yesterday whose car was broken down, so you know, in the very near future, I'll just say, well, just go to the Google Hangout or whatever. So I think it's really cool that we can do this. I think it's very fascinating, and it's amazing the exponential increase of technology over the past couple of years is really amazing. When I started in college in 1997, email had just come out. Email had just literally came out. And now you can just Google Hangout. Well, it took me 10 minutes to set up. But to anyone in the world, and our classroom is now global, it's fascinating. For those of you who grew up with this type of technology, you probably don't care much about it, but even over the past 15 years to see the changes is just amazing. So maybe we will have flying cars in a few years. One of the ways I connect with some of the people that I connect with when I do my research is over Twitter. In fact, it's the main way. I actually connected with Mike Moore over Twitter, and all of the players in my movie, I think we watched in this class, I connected over Twitter, all of them. Opens a lot of doors. And you can connect with very famous people over Twitter and engage directly with them. The famous people in your case, probably like MTV people or movie stars or people on teen pregnancy shows, I'm sure. But if you're into politics or news or academia, I'm not sure if one of the students is in here that's doing a paper on hip-hop, but what's really amazing is that somebody in one of my classes, I think it's my Wednesday class, is doing an article or doing a paper about hip-hop and cited an article just randomly in the midterm of someone who I follow on Twitter, and I just tweeted to him oh, one of my students cited you in the midterm, and he tweeted back. So, it's pretty amazing that now you do these article reviews, you think that these are like people up in Ivory Tower somewhere, or like, researchers or whatever that you'll never see, but you can actually talk to them, you can tweet them. I know Paul Amato, and I know Annette LaRue, and I think James Peterson is the guy on Twitter, and some of you have actually reviewed articles by those scholars, and the fact that you can actually just communicate directly with them now, just fascinating, just really fascinating. So I would encourage you to use the tools for the value that they have. A lot of people knock Twitter because there's a lot of people on Twitter that post really some stuff that I just don't enjoy, but there are other ways that you can really use it for good. And so what I did, today, and in the past I have, but I didn't think anyone really was engaging too much, is I'll hashtag Soch111, and I'll show you a couple of the things that I hashtagged recently. Number one is a link to what in the iTunes store. It's iTunes U. These are all free, and these are courses by the University of Michigan. So we talked last week when I was telling you about my streaming, how cool it is to have access to these online resources, and the Yale lectures and my lectures, which you've actually paid for. But here we have better stuff than me, coming from the University of Michigan, Intro to Stats and Data. This week in particular, we're going to do data and analysis in my lecture notes, but I have to be honest, the guys from Michigan do it a lot better than me, and their tuition's higher probably. That's the real capital exchange, right? But here, I guess they value themselves at zero. But you can go there. It's an open course, and you can learn all this stuff for free. It's really amazing. Or you can play Call of Duty all night. So it's up to you how you want to grow your brain. I just think it's really cool that you have access to this. But there's, I think, a common misperception about like academics that this is all I would listen to. No, it's all about a good balance, you know. I'll play a little Nintendo and then, you know, do a little study. So it's all about balance, I think. But you should at least give a glance at this, especially if you have a commute or some downtime, you know. Pick out a good session from the iTunes U, and I tweeted this one with hashtag Soch111 if you want to link back to it. Another thing I came across was a link to this article about post-Fordism in the discipline of sociology, and I thought it was a cool topic. I'm kind of ashamed that we didn't get to go into Fordism. I don't even want to kind of synopsize it, that's a word, briefly, because it's a little bit more in depth than the canned definition, but you can look at this abstract, which talks a little bit about it, but one of the reasons why I did tweet this, not only for a topic, was the structure of the abstract is really well done, as are many of the articles that you've reviewed. So, you know, I posted the link how to write an abstract, but what you should really do is pattern your abstract off of the articles that you reviewed. This was just this is the only article I've looked at in the past 2 days, okay, and it was good, so chances are that the one you're looking at is really well done as well. If they pass, you know, peer review into the scholarly journals, they should be good. That's the assumption, right? But I'll just go through the elements of this abstract quickly so you can see how great it is. So its first sentence says, a number of commentators have suggested that the shift from a Fordist to a post-Fordist regime of political economy has had positive consequences for sociology, including the reinforcement of critical sociologies, cites 2 authors. So basically that tells you what the article is about, the topic. If your article is about hip-hop, you'd say it there. If it was about crime, incarceration rates, gender, sports, whatever, you would put it right there. And this is great too, because they've cited 2 authors paraphrasing without a direct quote. If that were a direct quote, that'd be plagiarism, but it's not. And so you've already included citations there at the beginning. In text, multiple authors with use of semicolon. That's great. Second sentence. This article argues that, although disciplinary, blah, 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 what is emerging is a new form of instrumental knowledge, that of applied interdisciplinary social studies. But important to see here is this. This article argues that, here. Okay, again, the first sentence. A number of commentators have suggested this. This article argues that this. For example, this argument. The response of many sociologists to that argument has been this counter-argument. Argument, counter-argument. The article traces how the idea of internal critique within sociology has developed to embrace knowing capitalism. Again, sums it up. At the same time, that's the counter, does this other thing. The critique of sociology also becomes, that's sort of a causality there with the becomes verb. And where many sociologists continue to claim a special interest in critical knowledge, the article suggests that in contrast, so this one is highly using very frequently the counter-argument and the contrast and comparison format. So if you're doing that sort of thing, which I know one of you at least is, you might want to pattern your abstract after something like that. So it's very well done. It tells you what they're talking about, and then it lists a whole lineage of counter arguments or point counterpoints. So that's just one format. But I thought it was great. You should pattern it after. Now topics, hot topics. This is always a topic for professors, but it just came up today in my Twitter feed, so let's see when it was actually from. Today, yeah, it was on CBS News. So exploitation is a very fundamental principle or topic within Intro to Sociology courses, exploitation. You can talk about, in my Global Studies course, how the workers in China are exploited by, you know, these capitalist multinational corporations. Your iPhone basically exploited workers in China, and your Nikes and your purses and that sort of thing from sweatshops. I learned the other phones where they came from recently. I think Samsung, I think is Korean, yes, and Panasonic is Japanese. But the iPhone is exploiting Chinese workers. Anyways, exploitation is part of sociology, right? That's when you have a hegemony and you have a dominant class with power. over another who tend to exploit those folks. Exploitation can occur in many different ways. You can have blatant exploitation with the sweatshops or the slavery in the United States, for example, or you can have very subtle exploitation. Some might argue that professional athletes are being exploited, even though they make many millions of dollars. And I actually, in that camp, I would argue for the current exploitation of the workers of professional athletics, but that's an entire course, entire semester that I don't teach. So, who gets exploited? Professors. I'm someone that gets exploited. As I think I've told you, teach a semester here. I want to say they pay me about $1,100 to teach 16 weeks or something like that. I don't even remember. Maybe it's 2,000. But my gas money is at least close to that, and the time I put into it outside of 3 hours that I teach here, obviously I'm getting paid with the gas and the number of hours under minimum wage. So you think that with my degrees and stuff that I'd be balling, you know, or whatever, but it's not true. And that's because I fall into a class of professors. Another fundamental topic in sociology is class, you know, and privilege and prestige, but in this case, classification. And I'm in the class or the category of adjunct. Do you all understand what adjunct means, as opposed to a tenured professor or even a tenure track? They limit our credits per semester at 6. So an adjunct can only teach 6 credits, which is a total of maybe $4,000 a semester. So they cap the income at about $8,000, which is really important with the Obamacare discussion now. Like adjuncts, and we don't have access to like healthcare and that sort of thing. So if anyone really made a life out of, you know, life's earning out of adjunct, those people tend to make about $22,000 a year and work about 60 to 70 hours a week with no health insurance. So that is the way that colleges exploit adjunct professors. If you care to learn more about that topic, read the news story or do a study on it. But this is the case. So those are just a couple ideas and topics to get us started for the day, because as you know, if you're paying attention, we only have one class left, so just trying to segue into next week, which is our last week, which we'll just have an open discussion about our papers. And so, as I say every week, you need to walk out the door tonight with a solid footing and foundation of what your paper's about. You should have about 9 pages written already. And this will just tell you how to analyze the data that you should have already collected, and you'll just wrap it up over the weekend, print it off, bring it in next week, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so this shouldn't be a ton of information, although it turned out being more information than I intended it to be, because really data is a key component of your paper. You know, a lot of students, especially intro students, have a false perception that research is going to a library and finding an encyclopedia and copying what it says in the encyclopedia or the dictionary. That's not research. That's literature review. You're reviewing prior literature, and that's what you do in 3.5 pages of your final project. But your research is active, it's practical, it's pragmatic, and it's applied sociology, although some people knock that. But your research is a combination of your literature review, I guess you could call it, but I don't know. Your method, analyzing the data that you acquire from performing your method, and then often also forgotten is the analysis of the data. So as I'll talk a little bit later on probably, is if you do a survey and if you get data and you give me a table that says, you know, 40% said this, 60% said that, great, it's a great table, and I appreciate it, but you will then have to tell me why the data, and that's the analysis of the data. Short but sweet, 2-sentence explanation. You want to know where your data and analysis fits into the final project. You know, we're at this point in the semester, towards the end, and it's there in the chronology of it. You have your cover page, your abstract, you write your introduction, you have a 3.5-page literature review, 2/3 of a page of methods, 2/3 of a page of sample, and then you have about 2/3 to 3/4 of a page of data and analysis. You know, give or take, those are flexible, but that's going to get you to your 10 to 12 pages. Limitations in discussion section kind of can bleed into conclusion or analysis, so it's not a required section. None of these are technically required, although if you don't use those, it's at your own risk, buyer beware. And I've had great students that don't use those section headings, but for those of you first timers, you might want to stick to the framework. But this one of all of them would probably be the easiest one to omit because the limitations in discussion, like I said, blends into each of the prior and post sections. So I don't have a PowerPoint on that, so just understand that it should go in there. And if you don't know what limitations in discussion are, that section or what that means, we can have a discussion, but I think it'll come out in this lecture about what that means. So your method is how you acquired the data. Your sample is who you got the data from. Then there it is, your data. And then what your data means is the analysis. And then you compare your data that you found in the discussion section to the prior literature data. And then you conclude your results, how you filled the gaps left by prior literature, and how your study is important and has future implications, and how it can be utilized by whatever field. If you're doing educational research, then you could submit it to the Michigan Board of Education, or if you're doing health research, give it to a hospital or whoever you want to give it to. And then your bibliography should be easy, I think 100 points. You should have already perfected that in your midterm. If you got knocked down in your midterm, you should have took it immediately to the Writing Center, had them clean it up, or at least study the Purdue OWL site and got that nice and neat, because I will grade the bibliographies a lot harder on the final than I did on the midterm. The midterm is assuming that you're still learning it, but the final is assuming that that's it, final, it's done. That's the end of the course, no discussion afterwards. You don't learn anything afterwards unless you go out and learn on your own. So you should have perfected the bibliography at least. The rest is up to kind of subjective, but the bibliography is very objective grading. So I give it a lot of points so I can maintain objectivity. There are a lot of types of data. These next two slides will just show you where you can get data from. And of course your data is going to depend on what you're studying. And this list was from the University of Texas. All of these are hyperlinks, so if these data sources appeal to you, by all means go use them. And I want you to be aware that they're there, especially if you do work in the future, beyond this class, beyond this paper. If you were to do a population course I taught last summer at Saginaw Valley, you might use a lot of census data. If you were doing, I don't know really all the courses that they offer at Saginaw Valley. I know more of the courses offered at Michigan State. But sociology of work is very common. You might get a data set from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. If you're a business major, you might go at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. There's a religious data, which is kind of cool. Didn't see that one last night. But tons of data sets. Similar to how you pick out your journal articles, like a lot of you who are doing health, final projects, health-related, found journal articles in medical journals, and that's the same thing here. If you're doing medical research for sociology, medical sociology is a thing. It's a class, it's a discipline. You'd go to the Center for Health Statistics or the National Institute for Health, or if you're studying a specific sample of adolescents, you go to this National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health. So this is these are a bunch of places to get data. And essentially what these are, the census being the most basic one that you can think of in your head, these are basically downloadable spreadsheets, okay? That's what a data set is in quantitative terms. It's just spreadsheets with numbers on them. So if you were to download a spreadsheet with census data, it would be, 20 million, I don't know how many people are in America, 20 million cells big, long, and then the columns would be like gender, age, race, income, and the census data is actually pretty cool. I don't know if many of you know this because you think of the standard census, which is like front and back, but the census data, they have a code book that's like 150 pages long. There's all kinds of questions in there, like how long did you live with your parents growing up, how tall was your second ex-wife, things like that. Not specifically like that, but there are a bunch of really interesting questions in there that you wouldn't know. The question book is like literally 150 pages long. It's amazing. I don't think a lot of you realize that some of that is contained within that data set, but it is. And so if you were trying to figure out something through statistical analysis, like I want to know, what are the cancer rates for people who play basketball on Thursdays and eat fried chicken on Fridays and smoke cigars on Sunday mornings during prayer service at church. You could like go to all these data sets and be like, you could get them from here, here, and there, and then you just make it into an equation, and then you say 25%. If you crunched all those numbers, that actual data, when you hear studies along those lines, that actual data is contained in these sets, and people analyze those numbers. Scholars analyze those numbers using very complex formulas. I'm not a quantitative analyst, and I don't teach stats. As you know, I've been proselytizing the qualitative methodology. But just so that you know, in the Intro to Sociology course, if you were to take stats or a population class, although I've been taught qualitative methods in my population class, you could use any of these data sets. And, I know we take a lot of stuff for granted, especially certain generations who have been lucky in our lives. Me being one, I take a lot of stuff for granted. But this was a list of about 25 data sources. And if you look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are right at University of Michigan. The University of Michigan is one of the premier, if not the premier, it might be the best in the nation at survey and social and public policy survey research, and all of these studies that they do and all of these data sets that they have. It's really phenomenal because, like, I show you the Yale lecture and I say, oh, you have access to Yale. Okay, anyone can watch that YouTube. But geographically, physically, if you wanted to go to town on data sets, like, start looking at these data sets, start getting into the numbers, and then you could eventually go study in grad school at University of Michigan and be really awesome. This is like, it's one of the best. And, University of Michigan has one of the best law schools, one of the best medical schools. It's great. And Michigan State has very competitive schools as well. So you don't have to set your sights at Saginaw Valley. Not that there's anything wrong with Saginaw Valley, but just look at the gold mine that we have within our great state of Michigan and think about all the potential possibility and opportunity for upward mobility that we have right there at your fingertips. It's really amazing. You can go work there, intern there. So again, these are quantitative data sets and numbers. You have to consider what you're studying and where you'll get your data from. And if you're studying any one of these things and you want to get your data from there, by all means, go ahead. So that's an education on the data sets there that you may use later on in life, but probably not going to use in this class because it's Intro to Social class. You're just trying to absorb as much information as possible at this point. Where do I prefer that you get the data? Well, from doing your own study, okay? This is what I would prefer you got your own data. The preceding slides, I would kind of call them, and I don't know if this is technically right, but I would kind of call it secondary data because somebody else went and got it. Maybe they performed a bunk survey. Maybe University of Michigan really is the worst surveyors of all time, and I'm totally wrong and off base. If you want to do an actual good survey or interview or ethnography, do it yourself. I strongly believe that you could all do better work than anybody else that's ever done sociological methods in the history of time if you just really tried hard. So do your own study, collect your own data, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do in this class. We prepared all semester by looking at how other people did stuff, other people's studies. We've developed our own methods and sampled through the past 2 weeks exercises. Now you do your own study and you gather your own data and then you analyze it. And I think that that's a pretty cool thing to do. You know, there's one thing to try to be like Michael Jordan. There's another thing to go out and break all this records. So that's what I'm encouraging you to do. The two distinct types of data and types of methodology, now you see how they blend together because I've already taught this, are quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative basically is numbers, not to overcomplicate anything. And qualitative is text and words. This is a very basic explanation. So, little class response. Tell me something a little bit about Dark here on the board. And you can tell me the picture. You can tell me anything about this picture. I told you one thing, it's Darth Vader. Tell me something else. Anything? Evil. Yeah. Evil? It's black. What else? What? Why did you say evil?
Because it says evil.
Because it says evil, and somebody just said it. It says a lot of words, right? So, what you have here, this is kind of corny. It worked well last night, though. Is you have a picture painted with words. Okay. Here you have a picture painted with numbers, and here you have a picture that's painted with words, not necessarily painted, but a picture formed by words. And so with qualitative research, what you're doing is you're trying to paint a picture using words. If you do quantitative research, you're trying to paint that same picture using numbers. Okay? So that's why I choose this, and why I had on my first slide the picture of this was also with words, but I don't know if any of you noticed that. But that's really what a lot of you are going to be doing in this class. Your qualitative research is painting a picture of phenomenon and scenarios, occurrences, exploitation, classes, racism, gender, stereotypes, whatever you're doing, whatever you are doing, many of you will be painting your picture with words. And that's why I put that picture up there, because it's a picture that's painted with words. Now, quantitative, my arch nemesis, the evil empire of quantitative analysis. I didn't use that symbolism last night. This is from the societypages.org. It's a great website. And in fact, Lisa Wade, you can tweet her, and she'll definitely respond. And she does this website. So quantitative is numbers, but what you have to be careful with numbers is that they can be manipulated very, very easily. And I think a lot of the American public is manipulated and persuaded by numbers because we are either too busy or too something to pay attention. So what this represents, and again, if you can't read this, you can read it through the links which I posted to the presentation on VSpace, is here we have a representation of the same thing. And this dot represents 10,000 people. This is 20,000 people. This dot is 10,000. This is 20,000. So each of these is supposed to represent twice as many people. But what's the problem here? Okay, in this case, the scale is based on the circumference of the circle. And another mistake you can make would be basing the scale on the diameter or radius, but I believe in this case it's based on the circumference. So this circumference is twice as much as that circumference. And that makes the bubble actually look exponentially bigger than the other bubble. So if you were making a report for your boss or the President of the United States, and you're trying to say twice as many people have cancer than don't have cancer, and you gave them these bubbles, you'd actually be lying with numbers. You'd be manipulating the data, and you'd be showing it wrong because you can't graph it out like this. You can't visualize it like this. That's wrong. This is right, where the dots are actually based in size proportion by the area within them. So I don't know if my math's correct, but perhaps this is 3.5 times wrong, or 3.1 times wrong. These are right, where the area is twice as big. So somebody would say in their report that this is twice as big, and somebody would say this is twice as big. This would be right, that would be wrong. This is based on area, that's based on circumference. So just to let you know, a lot of people think numbers don't lie. If 50% of the people in Flint are murderers, then that number doesn't lie. Well, that number can definitely be manipulated. As we'll come to find out at the end of the lecture, numbers, you need to have more than just one visualization or one analysis of the numbers. You need to look at several different factors. Otherwise, people can get absolutely skewed results. Okay, quantitative versus qualitative. Again, we've talked about this before, but now this is the data and analysis slide, so you can now see how it's supposed to all come together now. And it's supposed to all make sense about why did I choose a qualitative method? Why did I choose this sample, that sample, representative of my population? Well, this is why I prefer qualitative methods. One is because I just like doing them. But also, qualitative methods focus on meanings rather than quantifiable phenomena. So if you're trying to figure out how someone got cancer, and you talk to them about their behaviors, smoking cigarettes, living next to a nuclear power plant, etc., and you talked about that, you could try to find the meanings of their behaviors, not just that they smoked, not just that 80% of smokers get cancer. We could actually figure out why they smoke. Maybe it's from family influence or the stress in their job, this sort of thing. So you could quantify that, but qualitative data and qualitative methods try to get more at the meaning than these quantifiable presentations of data and phenomena. Also, what you do with qualitative methods and qualitative data is to collect a lot of data on a few cases, as opposed to little data on many cases. So I think that I could go and interview somebody for about 2 or 3 hours, and I will get more data from that 2 or 3 hours than those columns on the spreadsheet that is the United States Census. So the United States Census surveys 20 million people and gets a lot of data on a lot of people. But if I talk to one of those people for a couple hours, I probably have more information about them than does the census. So again, to restate that, qualitative focuses on a lot of data from just a few cases or small sample size, n equals small number, and quantitative is little data on lots of cases. Qualitative is in-depth and detail without predetermined categories. Obviously, from something like the census, you have predetermined categories like race, gender, income, and that sort of thing. So if you want to do qualitative, it's almost a grounded theory approach. You go in without predetermined categories, and you look for depth and detail as opposed to going in quantitatively. You probably know what you're trying to find out. Obviously, with the census, they have their categories already predetermined. They know what they want to find out. Qualitative, you have an idea, but then you want to seek depth and detail from it. Qualitative, here, the researcher is an instrument. And I think that's pretty cool. The movie that I showed that I did with the interviews, when I was doing a lot of those interviews, at one point in time, I was literally the only white guy in a gym of about 300 African Americans. And I was the researcher, and I was there in the study. So that had some type of impact on the responses that were given. The same thing I told my class last night. If you try to go to a church and you dress very provocatively as a female, and you try to go survey people in church about, I don't know, sex practice or abortion or something like that, and you went like that, your responses may be different than if you go into a church dressed like a preacher or a nun or something like that. So you, as the researcher, play a role in the actual research with qualitative methods, whereas quantitatively, you know, and this is an intro course, so we can't go too much in depth, but because arguments can be made either way. But as a researcher, it's a little bit more, you're not an instrument. The computer is more the instrument than you are. You just put numbers into the system, crank out, you know, numbers as results. But again, you know, we could definitely have a long discussion at a bar over beers or something like that about that, because you could definitely have bias in quantitative research. But I would say, from a basic standpoint, you play more of a role, and you're more of an instrument in qualitative studies. So I prefer qualitative again because there's context to go off of that last point. You're an instrument, you play a role, and you have more context. So when I go into that gym, I see what's going on. More outside than even just individuals that I'm interviewing. Because if I was taking a survey and I survey somebody on Facebook or something, I don't know where they're at when they take their survey, you know, or what their environment is. But in the case of, and this is a very important point, in the case of qualitative research, I'm interviewing I'm getting a response from one person doing an interview. But I also have the context of the entire gym, and although I'm not recording 100% of the data, I will go back and I'll make field notes about the proportion of race, the proportion of gender, the proportion of age of the people in the environment of when I was conducting the interview. So that, I think, is more valuable data than just numeric response to a survey, where you don't perhaps know the environment. At this point, attention to the impact of the researchers and others' values on the course of the analysis. As I mentioned, with the church and the dressing provocatively example, this would be a good example of the impact of the researchers and others' values, either contradicting or coinciding. And then rich descriptions of the world. And that's what qualitative research does. It provides rich descriptions of the world. You paint the picture with words, okay, to call back to that Darth Vader image, rather than quantitative, which measures specific variables. So if you're going to measure stuff with numbers, you use quantitative. If you're going to provide a rich description of the world, you would do qualitative. So the choice is yours. I started with the quantitative, so I feel that I gave it a fair shake. And I think I only had 2 slides about qualitative, so it's very even. Although statistically, it was even. So quantitatively, you would say it was 50-50, but qualitatively, if you listen to what I say and how I slant things, you might have a different analysis of my presentation. So if that sunk in at all, that little explanation, you might have a better understanding of the difference. Charts. What does this graph aim to tell us? For anyone in the first couple of rows, can you jump and you don't have to knock me off my feet. It literally says what it claims in the wording. So that's why I choose you, because you can read it. Can you tell me what does this graph claim to tell us?
Americans live longer now than they used to.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. That's what I wanted you to say. Whereas my class last night, I was like, no, you're supposed to say this. It was a good answer. What this says is, the graph below demonstrates that Americans are living longer. Again, this graph shows that Americans are living longer. And how does that show? How does it show that? As I think you mentioned, I have terrible memory because I am aging like this population. This is over time. So here we had less proportion and this is what they said last night, less proportion of the population was old in 1860, and a bigger proportion of the population is old currently. So the population, the proportion of the population that is retirement age has increased. But does that necessarily mean that people are living longer? I would argue no. If I saw a graph, this shows me proportions of old people, okay? If I look at this graph, the first thing I think is, okay, everybody in this survey could have died at age 66. So some people are dying earlier here, but everybody dies at 66 throughout this entire thing, because it just says 65 plus. So I would say, how are people living longer if everybody dies at least 66 years old? Now, if you show me a graph that said, oh, those people were living to, 55, and now people are living to be 220 years old, then I'd probably say, oh, you're right. People are living longer because they're living longer, like literally. But this graph, all it shows me is certain people are living longer, proportionally. So it doesn't convince me. I don't think it's valid, and that's how I would critique it. It's from a good source, Lisa Wade. I'm sure she'd argue with me, but then she'd probably say, you're right a little bit. They should have reworded the sentence. But even really great researchers have, and who knows, maybe this is from the United States Census, so maybe 20 million people, responded to this survey of the United States Census. They cranked out data. But just because they phrased their sentence wrong, just because they said what they were trying to present analytically there, no, it's not wrong, but I can critique it. I would probably throw this out if I was peer reviewing. I'd say, this is not accurate, this is not valid, this does not say that Americans are living longer. It only says that a proportion is living longer. It doesn't say overall people are living more years. Okay, so hope that made sense. It can be a manipulation of data, or maybe it's completely valid. It can be a circular argument. The data depends on your method. I can't stress that enough. If somebody here is doing a population study, you're almost going to have to use statistical data and analysis. I think probably because I stressed qualitative so much in the topics that you've chosen, many of you are probably going to do qualitative, but it depends what data you get, numbers or words, depends on what method you choose. Here's a list of qualitative methods that I've taught some and I haven't taught others. Ethnography, that's participant observation. Now here's a new one that I got from this SAGE textbook that I could have assigned you for intro to social. Ethnography is basically a cyber ethnography. So it's using ethnography to study online communities. Ethnography, what it commonly is used for is an ethnographer will go over to like Africa and just stay over with tribesmen, an anthropologist, and they'll study an ethnography like that. So they say, well, I want to do the same type of participant observation, but online. That's way different from the African bush, right? Online is way different. So they call that an ethnography, using the same principles, but a different sample and really a different environment. Ethnomethodology, that sounds the same, is when participants construct the social world in which they live and how they create reality. You might use that with like religion. I'm trying to think of maybe the most prominent social group that you might use that for. A church. See how the church group creates its reality. Conversation analysis, I touched on this in my methods slides, and you can look back at those if you want and post the link. That's when you analyze sequential organization of conversation, and the conversation can either be oral, words, or written text. I don't know if you guys knew this, but a little trivia. Verbal does not mean from the mouth necessarily. Oral is the auditory and spoken word. There's oral and oral, A-U and O-R. But verbal actually can mean written text. So when I say conversation analysis looks at verbal conversation that can be heard or written. text. And what you do, as I said before, is presidential debates. You can do a great conversation analysis, and you can actually try to figure out who's more liberal, who's more conservative, based on categorized words. So you might say something like public health care would be like a liberal terminology. So you count who says it more, you know, and you say, well, Obama said public health care 12 times, and Romney said it 52 times. So I really think that Romney is more liberal than Obama since he uses that terminology more frequently. That would be a conversational analysis. I love this one for trying to figure out subtle performances of racism in sports. I have some great articles that do what's really called a discourse analysis as opposed to a conversation analysis. And then narrative analysis, that focuses on the story itself. So I think it says it in here. Yeah, biographies. If you actually looked at a set of biographies from, say, like the Holocaust victims or something, and you wanted to analyze almost discourse analysis style the biographies of a set of people or a series of events like the Holocaust, then you could try to get an in-depth understanding of that phenomenon through a narrative analysis. And that, I think these are fun. I really do. I think that's fun, that's fun, that's fun. Sitting and just hanging out with people and observing them, I think it's fun. That's why I do sociology, is because this is our science, and I think that's fun. You can make a living out of this. Not good if you're adjunct professor. This is actually what we do. So some of you do stuff like math, have fun with that in life, you know, or health, and you cut people open, have fun with that. But I just go hang out with people and talk to them. That's fun. But to each your own. And for anyone that cuts people open, you'll make way more money if that's a priority of you. And go have fun. I need money. If you ever get money, give me money. Because I need more money. I'm getting a roof right now, and it costs a lot of money. Okay. Matt. Whatever you do in life, make it be worthwhile. And whatever you do in this course, make it worthwhile. And I can only encourage you to make a difference in the world. You know, Sociology 111 is not a class that, you know, I'm sure most of you took it because you have to take it. And a lot of you think that you don't want to be here. But what I hope I can convince you as we segue into the final weeks of class and week of class is the importance of the subject matter and who's affected by this stuff and who's not. And how there are still some major problems even within our country. And many of you think there isn't because you live easy lives. And you've been very privileged in your upbringing. But I have put a map on here to make a point or two in the last few slides of this lecture. This is, can anyone, it's kind of a hard map to tell right off the bat, but if you're from there, does anyone tell me what the map is?
The blue is the black people, the red is the
Yeah, and where at?
trade.
Yeah. Yep. And this is not necessarily a proportional map. In other words, they don't put a blue dot where there are more than 50% black people. They just put the dots where the people are. So there's like, this is where the black people are, and this is where the white people are. It's pretty blatant, right? Can anyone tell me any more things that they see about the map? Say anything.
I think downtown, those red dots in the middle of all the blues, where we just put those new condos and that, you know.
Gentrification.
Yeah, so that's where, you know, the better people are moving. Except you gotta wait till you get to Morgan and Birmingham and Royal Oak and everything.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Tell me something about this map. There's a couple things. Should be kind of easy to see. And you probably won't hit on what I want you to hit. Last night didn't. Say whatever.
See the spokes of the wheel, the Motor City wheel? and Telegraph and
Yeah, good. That's very perceptive, yeah. Yeah, that is, well, I won't comment on that because there's nothing really that stands out about the spokes, but one thing stands out about a particular road. Can you pull that out of there?
maybe second.
See, one of the things we don't talk about too much in the intro course are boundaries, and
Oh, yeah. That's 8 miles, isn't it?
yeah, this is 8 Mile right here,
Yeah.
and
It's
what is 8 Mile divide? You know? Yeah, but boundary-wise. That's exactly right, and that's very profound because I'm so glad you brought that up because that leads me to something that I teach sometimes, but sometimes I forget. I would have forgot. That's totally right, and why is that right? That's absolutely right. Do you think it's just random? Why is it right? That's Wayne County, Oakland County, and they zone in Wayne County for poor people, and that's where you put strip clubs and liquor stores. So there's no random, it doesn't just randomly happen. You go to the hood, there's liquor stores everywhere.
What's interesting, to take that further, now you say that, they're all at, I mean, most of them, I heard, are on 8 Mile.
Mm-hmm.
So they want the people that have the money as close to, you know, they're not on the river and down there. That's interesting. I never thought of that.
It's completely
Get
accurate.
it as close as they can to where there's money.
Yep, and but they won't put them in their neighborhoods
Right.
because they don't want the
Right.
rough people in their neighborhoods.
Right. So,
So I'm jumping the gun here. But they put the liquor stores here. So this is a map of racial segregation. This is where the black people live. So people are in the government, they go to their government offices and they go, where are we going to put the liquor stores? You can't say. Let's put them where the black people are. So you go, let's zone them into Wayne County. What are they doing when they do that? They're putting the liquor stores and the strip clubs here. They know that. They have these maps. They're not stupid. They're intentionally putting liquor stores in black
it's
neighborhoods.
like your Walmart thing in Flint.
Yeah.
It's the stock class.
It's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. And this is current. And this is going to continue like this. And then they tax differently because obviously you've got Oakland County, you've got El Brooks up there, and you've got Wayne County, and people don't know how to run their governments. So these people, and then you ask yourself, oh, why don't they just move across the street? You know, they just move. Some people are stuck. Some people are a stuck class. And Richard Florida writes about that stuck class. They can't get across the street. And they are screwed, and they are there. And you think things are changing. That's what it looks like right now. Makes me angry. Very angry. Now, what is this? A map of children in poverty. Same area. This is Detroit. You can see a little bit more clear where 8 Mile is. This is by county. So what you have is children in poverty here. As you saw, we know where that is in the last one. So it's, you know, when you see a map of divided races and segregated populations, on the surface, you see that, and you go, that's not, you know, black people like to live by black people, white people like to live by white people like to play golf, black people like to shoot craps and drink beer, whatever. You make these assumptions as if these are choices that people want to do, that they would want. I'm not saying that you all make those assumptions, but it happens a lot. As if people want to live there, and these people want to live there, and that everything's just how everyone wants it to be. But then you find another map, and there are a bunch of maps. I just, for time's sake, only put one up there. This is children in poverty. I don't think these kids want to be in poverty, but that's where the poverty is. Who lives there? Those people. What are their kids experiencing right now? Over 60% of poverty in certain areas in Detroit. So people are not, they do not have equal access to, in this case, it's money, as other social groups. And it's that blatant. Like, I don't make these maps up. That's 8 Mile, that's the dividing line. This is where the black people live, this is where the white people live. Where are the poor kids? Right there, not so much up here, or over here. That's a problem, that's a big problem. You know, I think I only deflect problems with jokes to make myself not go crazy, but I think I said earlier, like, you can go to the soup kitchen down here so many times and dish out so many bowls of soup before you realize that there are bigger problems than just giving these people soup. You know, there are bigger problems than to solve than just giving people soup. We gotta fix that. What?
How do you fix it?
Well, for starters, you gotta bust this up. You know, not to get way philosophical on you guys. I know it's the end of the course, but boundaries are terrible. Why do we have wars? Boundaries. Why do people have turf wars or, you know, boundaries? You know, people protecting their areas, this sort of thing. So boundaries create a lot of problems. And in this case, I think that's one of the most blatant things that stands out to me is people that I just talk to, like, randomly will actually, Michael Moore. Yeah, Michael Moore had this idea. Yeah, in my thing. Yeah. Flint, you could have the same map of Flint, okay? And then you go to the suburbs, and they're all a lot better off. So what if we just eliminated the city boundary of Flint, and instead of having it be Flint, the whole government was just a consolidated school system and a consolidated government, and it turned into like Genesee County, where you could have this Flint kids could go to the Grand Blanc schools, Grand Blanc's kids would be bused to the Flint inner city schools, everybody's on the same tax base and bracket. So the taxes to Grand Blanc would go in and fund certain stuff in Flint because there would be no city boundaries. If the boundaries were torn down, things might change a little bit. So that's one theory. You have to start with theories. Because if you think that, because you have to start something like that. There has to be a big movement like that because you can't just change up the taxes. They don't have any money. You think there's an industry going to go?
This research on this, and there's a huge percentage that most black kids don't have any schooling by the time they get to elementary school, where white children have to do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, just that alone is starting before they're even in school, which the kids don't have control of. So obviously you gotta go to the parents. I think the parents are ready to start to get the kids more involved, to give them access to kids more involved. I don't know.
There's a lot of things you got to start somewhere. That's the thing. So
it seems like you have to start with the generation, because the older people that live there, they didn't have to be comfortable with it. You know what I mean? Different neighborhoods that they didn't grow up in.
sure, you got to start with the generation, and that's why it makes me so angry when people are so worried in the suburbs about like the school of choice and the busing and those kids are going to tear down our schools and blah blah blah. Okay, you know, maybe they will affect your school, but in the meantime, if you leave them in these schools, this is going to continue to happen. So it's definitely a generational thing, and what would be effective is to at least start with the kids, I think, so that when they grow up, if you give the kids, get the kids out of poverty, give them the education. I mean, wherever, however you want to approach it, you got to approach it. And we're not going to solve the world's problems in a class, but you know, we got to start something. We have to start something. This just makes me so mad.
I think we have to start at home. Like you talk about the schools, but the teachers really do so much. Like, no,
they're in every spot. Like I saw sleep in that big sleep, and then the parents were expecting time to go home, the teacher can't do about it. And try to find those sleep of the life and stuff.
So this is and I know this won't be a very convincing argument, but kids here don't care, right? They don't care. We can kind of agree that this is where there is less caring going on. But as I mentioned earlier, this is where we put more liquor stores and more poverty and more caps of their incomes at Walmart wages. And so it's like they're not going to care because they don't see doctors and lawyers and country clubs. Why would they ever want to aspire to anything?
In your video, when you interviewed a lot of guys, they said that they felt like they were stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And this said that these people feel like they're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like that's just the mentality that people use as an excuse?
No, I don't. Because
I don't.
I think people really are stuck and they can't get out of it. And I think any of us who have been able to get out of it, if we ever were stuck at one point, because I was stuck at one point and I got out of it, I just think I was lucky. And I think I had some capital because of how I was raised. Like, I had a really good upbringing. So I think I was able to get out of some real deep ruts that I was in financially. That I think people without the skills that I had, I don't think there's any way they could have got out of them. And I don't think it's because they didn't care. But it's like, I was working, at a car wash and delivering pizzas and making, $300-400 a week. And if you do that for a while, and then if I would have accidentally had a kid, or if one of my family members would have got cancer, a girl in my class last night cuts hair, and husband was a DJ, so they don't have health insurance, and he got colon cancer. So you talk about a situation like that, they are screwed. So like some people really are screwed. Obviously some people are lazy, whether they're rich or poor, but some people I just think can't get out. I really would make an argument for a certain group of people. I mean,
You talk about how the income is so different from the white household to the black household, just the fact. And I don't think any of this can change, though. It's sad without the politics, which is essentially money. I mean, for somebody to change those boundaries, there's going to be a lot of people allowed not to. And those are generally the people that whatever, have the power and have the money, and they don't want to mess with the world north of them. You know what I mean? And they're the ones that are making calls.
now, back to, what's your name, Lucian? Brandon, back to your point. So, can you say again what your hypothesis is? Yeah, an excuse. Do you think, now when we're looking at maps like this, do you think all of those people, like, does that happen because all of those people who use it as an excuse just all decided to live together in one neighborhood?
No, I'm generalizing it because they're all living in the same areas. That's what I'm saying.
You think that
they live in that area, they see so many people failing that they can do it.
But with the generational thing, I don't think that they really moved to it. Like, I think those are remnants of closed down shops or factories or migrant workers from the South that came up looking for work, couldn't find it, now they've been screwed for a couple of generations, and they just can't get out of it.
But I totally understand what you're saying, that's why they're there, but they could get out if they didn't. I feel like there's something to see for the you said you have to work hard, you have to rely on others and stuff like that, but I feel like a lot of people don't, because they go right to the streets, they go right to the streets and stuff.
Because they don't know, like, the path that I had, I knew it. Like, now we're getting a little bit psychology, but social psychology is kind of part of the intro. Like, I knew that, like, something in me, in my upbringing, again, I, like, knew that I could change my trajectory if I worked hard and this and that, but there are patterns and norms that are created, social norms that are created in those neighborhoods, and so maybe you're right, it's that maybe the social norm has been created in that neighborhood somehow that those people cannot flip the switch.
Right.
Yeah, so is that their fault, though?
Well, I don't think it's their fault, but I think it's not good that they
So how do we change it?
start somewhere. So,
But like just going in and telling them like, hey, look, man, you could totally make it in this world if you try. Like,
Well, I give them, I'm not saying I know what to do, but like, you showed that video and I saw Grandma Green, you can't do that stuff. And you go and do it fast. I mean, you can't tell me that there's not there are impoverished that aren't right, like brilliant. They just don't try. They're gonna end up on the streets, and they're gonna waste all their talent.
well, I think education actually, brilliance, I think is a little bit, not a lot, I think, acquired. And I think it has to do with the schools. That's why I was actually trying to make this movie to show that potential for athletics as careers. Like, yeah, I wonder if, because for so long we have American industrial system that you go and you get certain jobs, and a lot of you guys are going to get certain jobs where your income is kind of set at $40,000 to $80,000. But those jobs with the Walmarts and stuff like that, they are capped. Their income is capped. So I think, to get back to those like broad sweeping philosophical ideas, is if we change Detroit, and this would start with new laws, like if we said, all right, there's not going to be any liquor stores or strip clubs, we can't have any Walmarts, we're not going to have any factories, we're just going to make this some sort of economy, different economy. Like, do you think that would help at all? Or do you think people would still sell crack and shoot each other?
What do you mean? Take all that out there and just put it in a whole new economy?
Yes, because all they have right now, because all they can see, because they have like blinders on, is they're like, why would I even try? What am I going to do? Go work at some insurance thing or Walmart or whatever? Like, this sucks. I'm never going to be a doctor. Like, I can't be a rapper, you know? So we got to like change the whole economy where it's like, look, you don't have to sell insurance or work at Walmart or be a doctor. Here's a whole new economy. And I don't have like any good ideas of how it exists, but we just have to flip the whole economy upside down.
Yeah.
When they start with, they're trying, I don't know how well it's working, but they're doing like urban farming in Flint and stuff like that. Like, what if we level all the buildings in Detroit and just put up farms, had all those guys work on farms, produce a bunch of junk? It'd be sweet. They could sell it, or we could put up a sweatshop there. You know, make Detroit one big farm. I don't know if that's such a great idea, though. Man, they're screwed. You guys have to fix it. I'm trying my hardest. I feel so bad. That's really sad. So we have to figure out why. If you hypothesize that they have lazy attitudes, that's an okay hypothesis. You can have any hypothesis. You can say that all these people are lazy and born murderers or whatever your hypothesis is you want to say. We have to then figure out why. We have to figure out why. The incarceration rate for African Americans also in America is something like 80% or higher. That's not just a random occurrence. We have to figure out why. So, you know, I hate to harp on race so much, but that's just what I study. You know, I do race, youth, sports. Those are my things. So you'll hear me talk about race a lot. It's an intro course. I can't talk about everything, but the race is very apparent there. And it's sort of easy for me to teach in an intro class, and I hope that it hits home. But race is definitely not the only thing by any means. It's just one of our socioeconomic status categories. So yeah, I give preference to qualitative and race and all this stuff, but don't think that that's my only, you know, or that is my only thing. Don't think that that's the only thing in sociology. I think it's very important. I think it's very blatant. But what I did want to show you was, let's see, we'll get to this. In the slideshow, last slide, Wayne State. This is where I got the map from. And so I don't think that many of you are going to go get those data sets really and crunch numbers, but you're more than welcome to get these maps. And there are some great maps here. Again, the link is in the lecture notes. If you're doing age, you could go and get a map about the youth population. So like if I was doing something about youth and basketball, I would use something like that. Let's see, if you're doing elderly, if you were talking about something like that graphic from earlier, the aging population of the United States, you could go and get a map of the population over 65, figure out where they live. Maybe that's the problem with Detroit. Maybe everybody that lives there is over 70, and that's why they're all in poverty or something. Because they can't have jobs, right, in the American economy. Crime, I think some of you are doing the crime. I know some of my other students are. They have maps on violent crimes, different types of crimes, total crimes by precinct, or crimes like motor vehicle theft and robbery. Then we have education. So as she was making a point earlier about education, you may find in the map that the majority of people in Wayne County are high school or lower. The majority of people in Oakland County are college graduates or higher. So there's a map right there of education. I think those would be very telling. Again, I only had really time to look at the race one, but the education one I think would be very blatant as well. Health, although for some reason they do a lot of lead, I would prefer that it would be cancer, because that's I think more important than lead poisoning at this point. But who knows? Maybe lead poisoning is, Mad Hatter. Right? Family structure. I'm surprised not as many people as usual are doing family studies in this class as I've had in prior semesters, but there are maps on divorce, marriage, and family structure there. Then there will be housing. I touched on the gentrification, so you could look at housing, both makeup and cost and occupancy and types of buildings and types of taxes. Immigrants, I said it's been generational, so you can look at immigration, or I'm not sure if they have migration on there. Maybe they do, I don't know, they have a ton of them. Income, hugely important. Income and poverty, I think, go together, as well as income and labor, wages. So you could see how many people are working or not working, how many are working at home. Some people think that we can fix the economy just by giving people jobs. What if the jobs don't pay a living wage? I don't know how much good that does. More marriage and family. There's the migration maps. Fantastic. Awesome. Population maps you could pair with census data. More poverty maps. This is the one I think I used. That one. More families and persons. No, I did the children one. And then there are the racial maps. I did not use one of these for race, but it would probably be more relevant to use one of these for race if you're using a map from the same. I don't know. Use maps from different sources. But then there are the geographic boundaries. So if you were to say that the tax structures or the government, you tie in your multiple variables. Like I've always said, you can't just say that race leads to poverty or poverty leads to race in Detroit. You would throw in variables like education, income, and race. You put all three together and you have an outcome of whatever your outcome is, cause or correlation. So the geographic boundaries, I would make an argument, are some of the most important. And then they throw a very fun one there at the end, voter turnout. I think I showed this last night, where in the grand scheme of things, you have this thought in your head that for the people that are being screwed the most, that they would be the ones to go out and change things by voting most often. But what you have with this is the lighter shades of green is the lower voter turnout, and the darker shades of green are the higher voter turnout. I think it's only Wayne County, but you can see that the more you go towards the suburbs, the more voter turnout you have. So, to speak to his point of apathy, perhaps this would be a good one to try to show apathy for those people that just quote don't care or who have given up. You might use a map like voter turnout because it appears that they're not trying to change anything, through the governmental system, but then behaviors, obviously, if the governmental system hasn't helped them in the past, why would they pay any mind to thinking that it would change to help them for the better in the future? So that's the perpetual cycle that people who are disadvantaged get into, and that is, I think it's a terrible shame. So, well, that's all I have. Is anyone presenting tonight? Yeah, we got one. Just one single solo?
Yeah.
All right. You're gonna go too? Okay. So we'll have a break, and then we'll have presentations. And if you need to ask me anything about your paper, and I would encourage you to stay and watch the presentations of your peers. It's very respectful to do that. I think it's disrespectful to leave, but that's just my own opinion. And just know that next week you should bring in your paper. Print it out, bring it in, come, we talk about it. You just hang loose and talk about how you can make your papers better, and then you upload it to VSpace and you get your A. So come next week just ready to share your paper. This is not implying that you'll leave right now, or encouraging that. And I'll give you a set of things to talk about. Basically, I'll say, tell me your topic, why it's important, what your method is, what your sample is, give me some of your data and some of your conclusions. We'll do that next week. So take a short break, try to be back by 1:45.
Question.
No.
Yeah. Oh, it's just all week.
Okay, well, I have.
Yeah, please do some of that stuff. I encourage that.
I have my presentation in Keynote,
Okay.
and it's on my computer. Is there a way that I can plug it in? Okay, because I also put it as a PDF on my flash drive. So I can do either, but it's fun to check.
For a documentary, how do you want to?
Are you gonna have it done? Already done?
I'm just gonna the guy decided to do it. Get live.
Okay.
Is it?
Yeah, it's up to you. Yeah. Or if you're doing one, do you have any preview or anything like?
Well, one of the things is because two of the people that I've talked to, because they're kind of uncomfortable with like everyone hearing about their opinions in teacher unions. So I told them that you would be the only one seeing it.
Oh, okay.
But I can still talk about what I found from results and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I probably won't have like an actual physical product.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Yeah. And also,
we probably have more than some.
For sources, do you want me to just at the end put like kind of as a credits type thing? But these are the sources I looked at for data and stuff like that.
Yeah, you definitely need 6 sources.
Okay,
Yeah.
6 sources still.
Yes, any documentary or poetry or anything still needs sources.
And you want me to have like heading type stuff within it, like kind of like how your documentary had a little bit of almost the headings where it's just kind of saying this is kind of the methodology I use. This is a little bit of introduction of what people said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So since that's fair enough, can you just put I know you have those pieces in the civil literature part. We're doing that, so your pages on pretty much what we already did.
Yes,
So
exactly.
you're pretty much just discussing what they found
Yes,
and what they discovered, and then you go into what you found.
exactly right. Just a couple words of warning is some people like literally copy and paste their mentoring in, and I can see that obviously.
Yeah.
So you definitely need to revise it. When you revise it, do a couple of things. Number one, don't make it so that it's like Article 1 review, Article 2 review, Article 3 review. Blend them together.
Okay.
So like if all 3 of the articles you reviewed used a survey as a method, put that and write it in a sentence. Survey is very common for this topic. For instance, all 3 sources.
Okay.
And blend it together, make it flow well, and also leave out sentences like, in the midterm you may have said something like, yeah, this article has charts, and I don't like that, or I couldn't follow the article because they did. None of that.
You never really know talking about what you're doing.
Yeah, just focus on the substance.
And the one is you focus on the 3 articles you did in your midterm. You just the ones add the 3 other ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would encourage you to include those even in text citations, as one of your paraphrase things, because like you can write a sentence like that one abstract I showed at the very beginning of class. You can write a sentence like, many researchers have studied sports in general the past 20 years, and then just you could say like all 4 sources.
For all 6 of them?
Yeah, in a parenthetical citation if they talk about sports in a race or whatever. You don't need a full-out source to cite this.
Okay.
So that's how you kind of slip those.
I have more.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, no, I haven't had a chance. Keep on me, though. Keep eating up. Like, if you haven't had it by Friday night, send me another email. But I have intentions to do that. No problem. I haven't got to it either.
Okay. So is my actually pretty good except for like this year? Or like what else?
See, that's great when you say this article and these causes different databases. Great. Oh, dimensions too. Yeah.
So
Clarify
I
that.
feel like academic, that's what I talk about, or should I education?
Either one. Don't use both because it gets
Yeah. So then up here, do I just like do the first couple of words of this, or can I put my
Either one's fine.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't ever look at that.
Okay.
Whatever it says on the outline. I don't care. That's good. Yeah, that's pretty good. Make sure you put the education in there so you get it for academic. So that when I read outcomes, I know you're talking about education.
Okay, so I'm gonna add that.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Pretty straightforward, yeah.
Okay.
And you got a lot of the essential elements.
And then like for my introduction, I said like remove the word test, so just make it more like
Well, just the fact that it should really be tests, right? Like,
oh yeah.
yeah, so like be really careful on grammar.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of students do that, and I'll be like, grammar in the first sentence, no.
And when you say like not all like this kind of assumed, that for like some students that is the way the assumption.
Right, yes, very good point, yes, because what you want to do is not speak in absolutes, and I catch myself doing it all the time. Never say something that's a fact about everybody or nobody. Like, anytime I'm up here, I shouldn't say stuff like, look at all the African-Americans. No, so just the majority or a lot of students or some, so yeah, definitely do it like
that. When it says like point verses, because like right there, so I'm going verses.
yeah.
So what should I do?
Well, you could just say and, because really what verses implies is that like they're at war with each other, or they're against each other, or some sort of against each other.
Okay.
But yeah,
Alright.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
And the responses, I only have like 4. So after those 2, I don't know, like, go work and like all of my stuff. So I think I don't know. So after I did this,
Yeah.
like what I need to be doing before.
For sure.
Okay, because it should be today. It's
Yes, that's all we're doing.
Yeah, definitely send it to me, and although what I encourage you to do is upload the draft and send me emails, please check it out.
Oh, okay.
That's a lot.
Okay.
Also, with mine, think I gave her a because I appreciate her hard work.
Well, it's
Two-way.
that's I don't even know exactly what you get or
I I need to work on this.
I don't know. It's like, well, I don't know. I'll just send it to you. Alright. I didn't know exactly for the response. I feel like it's really close to you.
I can't focus.
Yes. Okay, and then.
No, my little sister,
Why?
Okay.
Oh,
I mean, like, he's growing, but like, actually, it's like, I was the far country, so like, you can get like,
Just as long as
and like,
I have to be able to say, if like an arbitrary sort of
yeah. Yeah, my little sister's no, just working. And she like sits upstairs and sits on the phone. I'm like, turn that shit down. And another thing is like to call me that. I'm like, why? Just like talking to my dad. My mom calls me every day. Like, yeah. Like now. Is he like the only child though? Yeah, that's what my little sister is. I think he gets bored and he doesn't love me.
Last week was just my girlfriend streamed it. But the cool thing about these are also they record, so it then automatically posts to YouTube, to my YouTube channel feed. So this is only the second time I've used it, and I appreciate you allowing me to test out the technology because next semester I think I'll really use it a lot more. This semester I started with the videos, and those worked well, but that took a lot of work. So I'm going to do the streaming thing, and that automatically posts to YouTube, which is a lot easier, which I think is pretty cool. And I'm very fascinated by the technology because we didn't have this stuff when I was in college. Now you have so much opportunity to do so many crazy things. As I pointed out, I've streamed Skype with Michael Moore. I Skyped with 2 other guest lecturers before. I'm hoping in the future I can actually have class with the Google Hangouts for the students that can't attend. I had a student yesterday whose car was broken down, so you know, in the very near future, I'll just say, well, just go to the Google Hangout or whatever. So I think it's really cool that we can do this. I think it's very fascinating, and it's amazing the exponential increase of technology over the past couple of years. It's really amazing. When I started in college in 1997, email had just come out. Email had just literally came out, and now you can just Google Hangout. Well, it took me 10 minutes to set up, but to anyone in the world, and our classroom is now global. It's fascinating. For those of you who grew up with this type of technology, you probably don't care much about it, but even over the past 15 years to see the changes is just amazing. So maybe we will have flying cars in a few years. One of the ways I connect with some of the people that I connect with when I do my research is over Twitter. In fact, it's the main way. I actually connected with Michael Moore over Twitter, and all of the
I had trouble with articles. The intro, there's, yeah, just the intro. Like, it was kind of, there's a sort of, I'm done with my literature case study. Except for here's my I'm on to Saturdays right now.
Oh, that looks great. Okay. All right. Sorry that took so long to set up. So as fast as I could go. But for those of you who didn't realize this last week while you're eating turkey, what we have here is a streaming website of the lectures now at my website, johngerdowa.com/stream. And not that I think anyone is streaming this right now, except but I think to what in the iTunes store, it's iTunes U. These are all free, and these are courses by the University of Michigan. So I talked last week when I was telling you about my streaming, how cool it is to have access to these online resources, and the Yale lectures and my lectures, which you've actually paid for. But here we have better stuff than me, coming from the University of Michigan, Intro to Stats and Data. This week in particular, we're going to do data and analysis in my lecture notes. But I have to be honest, the guys from Michigan do it a lot better than me, you know, and their tuition's higher probably. That's the real capital exchange, right? But here, I guess they value themselves at zero. But you can go there. It's an open course, and you can learn all this stuff for free. It's really amazing. Or you can play Call of Duty all night. So it's up to you how you want to grow your brain. I just think it's really cool that you have access to this. But you know, there's I think a common misperception about like academics that this is all I would listen to. No, it's all about a good balance. You know, I'll play a little Nintendo and then do a little study. So it's all about balance, I think. But you should at least give a glance at this, especially if you have a commute or some downtime. You know, pick out a good session from the iTunes U, and I tweeted this one with hashtag Soch111 if you want to link back to it. Another thing I came across was a link to this article about post-Fordism in the discipline of sociology, and I thought it was a cool topic. And I'm kind of ashamed that we didn't get to go into Fordism. I don't even want to kind of synopsize it, that's a word, briefly, because it's a little bit more in depth than the canned definition, but you can look at this abstract, which talks a little bit about it. But one of the reasons why I did tweet this, not only for a topic, players in my movie, I think we watched in this class, I connected over Twitter, all of them. Opens a lot of doors, and you can connect with very famous people over Twitter and engage directly with them. The famous people in your case, probably like MTV people or movie stars or people on teen pregnancy shows, I'm sure. But if you're into politics or news or academia, I'm not sure if one of the students is in here that's doing a paper on hip hop. But what's really amazing is that somebody in one of my classes, I think it's my Wednesday class, is doing an article or doing a paper about hip hop, and cited an article just randomly in the midterm of someone who I follow on Twitter, and I just tweeted to him oh, one of my students cited you in the midterm, and he tweeted back. So it's pretty amazing that now you do these article reviews. You think that these are like people up in ivory tower somewhere, or like researchers or whatever that you'll never see, but you can actually talk to them. You can tweet them. I know Paul Amato, and I know Annette LaRue, and I think James Peterson is the guy on Twitter. And some of you have actually reviewed articles by those scholars, and the fact that you can actually just communicate directly with them now, just fascinating, just really fascinating. So I would encourage you to use the tools for the value that they have. A lot of people knock Twitter because there's a lot of people on Twitter that post really some stuff that I just don't enjoy, but there are other ways that you can really use it for good. And so what I did, today, and in the past I have, but I didn't think anyone really was engaging too much, is I'll hashtag Social111, and I'll show you a couple of the things that I hashtagged recently. Number one is a link.
I'll show you like That's exactly. Yeah. This